Hi, and welcome to Chapter 11, Denial of Service Attack. Before we begin, as a reminder, I will ask you to copy a few notes on a separate Word document and submit them as homework. Okay? So, what is denial of service attack? It is an attack to prevent a user from normal communications accessing a resource. A resource can be a web browser, a wireless router, or a printer. There are different utilities and tools in achieving denial of service attacks. For example, a sync attack exploits TCP three-way handshake to make sure that the victim is unable to communicate or slowing him down with anyone else. So TCP is a connection oriented. If you remember, we talked about that early in 270 class. So TCP is a connection-oriented protocol that uses three-way handshake to create a connection before transmitting any data. So if an attacker keeps sending a sync signal and ignores the acknowledgement from the victim, it will indefinitely keep the victim trying to make connections with the attacker. So that type of attack is constant. You can easily make this up, and we'll do this in the lab itself. In the lab. We'll try to do that in the lab. Another type of attack is the ping of death. We'll try to simulate this in the lab. But when you normally send a 20 in the lab, when you do a ping command, you send a 24-bit echo request packet to a host. They'll respond back to you with an echo reply. Ping of death is when the attacker sends a very large packet, let's say 65,000 bytes, to make the victim have to fragment and reassemble the 65,000 packet, and then send it out send out the echo reply. The attacker ignores the echo reply and keeps sending echo requests over and over. Now imagine you send the echo request from several devices. Several, I mean, you could do hundreds if you can. And so the victim is constantly trying to really try to respond to all of these hundreds of, do echo replies to these hundreds of devices at the same time. So please write this down. The ping of death attack. There's also another one called teardrop, which is, I don't know if that's really important. But a Smurf attack. A Smurf attack is when you use someone else's IP address to launch an attack. That's something is also good to know, because if you spoof somebody else's address within the LAN, you can never pinpoint who the attacker is. So that's another something that I want you to write down. All right. And there's a whole bunch of others, such as Fraggle, Land. There's permanent DoS attacks, such as flashing. So that's also another good thing to write down. Flashing is when you accept a corrupted firmware update. So somebody sends you an update to update your firmware for your access point, or for anything, for an application. And so when that happens, they corrupt either your application, or your access point becomes really useless. And then you probably have to get rid of it, and it's probably in a lot of cases it becomes useless pretty much, and you have to buy a new one. So therefore, make sure you only update your firmware if you need to, and you update it only from the vendor website. Okay. Let's talk about, there's the flooding, the disrupt, the buffer overflow. So that's also another paragraph I guess I want you to write. A buffer overflow, every application is loaded into memory has a reserved buffer, or sometimes we call that a memory to use. So when the operating system grabs your application and puts it in memory, it reserves a specific memory for that application. An attacker can inject a code in the application to allow it to go beyond the reserved location. So when this happens, all the data in the memory becomes corrupt. And that's a big, huge problem, of course. So somebody can inject a little code in the applications, and it makes it go beyond the memory that's been reserved. Distributed denial of service attack is something that I also want you to write down. It uses several, sometimes thousands or millions of devices. Sometimes we call that, a robot network or a botnet, to send requests to a victim. Now, since these requests are legitimate, firewalls will permit them. But the victim will not be able to process all of these incoming requests. This is one of the most common types of attacks that are still happening today on the internet. So the distributed denial of service attacks are constantly happening, and IPSs got to keep an eye on these constantly every day. This type of attack happens every day. Now, so please write that down, the DDB. It uses a distributed group of computers to attack a target. Now, let's take a look at some tools. The tools you can use to create a botnet, to create the distributed denial of service attack. They may include Shark, Plugbot, Poison Ivy, Low Orbit Ion Cannon. Now, here are some strategies you can use to defend against denial of service attack or the distributed denial of service attack. So let's talk about that. So number one, I want you to write these down. So what are the strategies to defend against DOS or double DOS? Okay, so please write these down. This is important. Number one, you want to disable all unnecessary services, such as, for example, guest logins. You don't need that. If you remember when you're doing it in the lab with the Cisco switches, all ports on the switches, for example, must be shut down if they are not being used. All right. Number two, always use anti-malware. That's a given. I know Microsoft operating system automatically has the Defender, and so make sure that that's always been up and running. And so don't mess with, if you don't have it, adding additional malware such as McAfee's or anything like that is just it's always, if you install a new operating system, anti-malware has to be the first application that must be installed. All right, enable router throttling. Use proxy servers. Okay, so that's number four. Proxy server, this is where all the requests from the outside goes to a server before you let them in to the legitimate server for processing. So the proxy server will be outside your LAN, maybe in a DMZ zone, making sure that all the data that comes in is looked at, and if it's all okay, if it's not an attack, they'll let you into to be authenticated. Block all addresses that are not in use or have been reserved. So if you did your subnetting and there are some addresses that have not been leased, make sure they are being blocked. So you could do that with the firewall. All right. So you can also use the black hole or source IP reputation with IPS, with Cisco IPS technologies. You could do all of that. All right. So pretty short lecture. Like I said, this is all I want you to do. Make sure that you read the chapter, please. I know this is a quick overview of the denial of service attacks. And this is the notes that I'm giving you, that I will use these notes when we are doing the final exam. So please read the notes. Preferably you should definitely read the chapter. I mean, I'll be doing a disservice to you not to tell you just to concentrate on the notes only. All right, so we'll do this again. I'll go over chapter 12 and the additional chapters that we need to go to, and I will start going over some of the hands-on lab togethers. But that's for another video. All right, so until then, keep up the good work.